All right, welcome back to the Elias Macco Show. Now, I know some of you pine for police crackdowns on cyclists and bad behavior. Or get a load of this. Montreal Police has been giving, over the last 4 years, they've tripled the number of tickets that they've handed out to those on electric bicycles. Some people are praising the police's actions to increase safety, but others say that we need to be just a little lenient when it comes to e-bikes because sometimes people are on them because they don't have a choice. Think about getting to the Bixi stand and there's only electric Bixis available. We go to Magali Bebronne, who's on the line, program director for the cyclist advocacy group Vélo Quebec. Magali, welcome back to the program.
Good morning.
So what is your take on this? Every time I've spoken to someone who's had a serious incident on their bicycle where they've had an accident and they've fallen, they say, my goodness, if I didn't have a helmet, right? So we know that having a helmet is so important, yet we see it often, people without helmets on their bikes and e-bikes. What's your take?
Well, for sure, helmets are super helpful. We encourage everyone to wear one, even though we do think that it's a personal decision when it comes to a normal bike. We're not talking e-bikes. And we understand that the government has decided to impose a helmet on electric bikes because in North America, those can go up to 32 kilometers an hour. So we do understand that the risk can be a little greater. And also the fact that it's older folks sometimes who turn to these e-bikes, and we do know that they are more likely to get into crashes. The proposal that we are making is to take into account the fact that bike share has a different mode of functioning and that when you do take bike share, you might have planned it in advance. And we do see more and more people and Bixi users having their own helmet and wearing it on a daily basis. But it might also be a very spontaneous use because the metro has run down or you're combining it with another mode of transportation. And in that case, this kind of spontaneous usage is not conducive to carrying a helmet around, and we should maybe put our police energy somewhere else because ultimately wearing a helmet won't have any effect on other people's safety, whereas there's a number of behaviors that we should definitely be cracking down on.
Talking about police energy here, there's been a tripling, right? Over 4 years, a tripling in the number of tickets to those on e-bikes. Has it been an increased targeting, or is it simply the fact is we're using more e-bikes? So there are more people on e-bikes, so obviously the tickets will increase. Or do you feel there's an unfair targeting?
Well, I feel it's really easy to hand out these kinds of tickets, whereas it's a lot harder to focus on behaviors that are really problematic and that are putting other users at risk. We at Vélo Quebec really are for the principle of caution, meaning the bigger ones need to be cautious towards the smaller one. And that also applies to cyclists when it comes, for example, to yielding to pedestrians, respecting their right of way. And we've seen in the spring how we still have issues with that, including from cyclists who might not be respecting, for example, children getting in and out of school buses. So those are the kinds of behaviors that would really have an impact on everybody's feeling of safety. Now, we also have, since last week, a new rule on the mopeds that tend to use bike paths and try and pass as e-bikes, and those create, dangerous conditions for all users of bike paths. Now that we have the governmental tools and the bylaw and everything that's in the law that to prohibit them from using bike lanes, or lanes altogether, I hope to see the SPVN putting more energy on that because the cycling community has been complaining for years that they have to share their bike network with devices that are way too risky and make them feel uncomfortable.
So, Magali, I'm really happy you brought that up. Now, it was about 45 minutes ago on this show that we spoke to a gentleman and he bought an electric moped. This is a few months ago. He buys an electric moped. He spends $1,400. And then last week, out of nowhere, it's banned. And he was, taking his moped, his electric moped, not driving a car. He's taking the moped to work, to and from, taking him half an hour. He now has to, because it's illegal on everything, the bike past the roads, sidewalks, everywhere. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place where he's got to ride on the roads illegally now and hope he doesn't get a ticket. I'd love to know your thoughts on the government decree on those unlicensed mopeds and other electric type of scooters. What do you think that's a good thing? I mean, I know you mentioned how bicyclists are affected by it, but boy, do I feel bad to someone who got out of their car, decides I'm going to use an electric vehicle, good for the environment, and now is told you can't use your vehicle.
all your points are super valid. And I have to stress that at Vélo Quebec, we didn't have an opinion on whether these devices should keep riding or driving in general lanes of traffic. What we were asking is that they be banned of the e-bike category and of the bike network, because ultimately that's where we have vulnerable road users, and we want our children and our, more vulnerable people to be able to keep using the bike network without feeling threatened. So that was our ask. Now the SAQ has decided that they're banning those devices altogether, and I understand the questioning around environment and e-mobility, which shouldn't be outright banned. The problem is we had a double standard with it, where some of these mopeds and motorcycles were licensed, had insurance, and some others actually used a loophole in the system to try and pass as e-bikes. And I'm sorry, but the manufacturers and the sellers of these devices played with fire, and they're the only ones responsible for using a loophole in the system to try and pretend their devices were e-bikes. They were not. So I do feel sorry for people who, in all good faith, bought these devices and, left their car at home. And I hope there's a way out for them. But ultimately, it's no news. It's just re-clarifying what is an e-bike and what isn't, and saying, well, these are not motorcycles, they're not licensed, and so they're not allowed to ride anymore.
We're with Magali Bebronne, who is program director of the cycling advocacy group Vélo Quebec. So, Magali, this is a question that I have, because, you mentioned e-bikes, right? They have a maximum speed 32 kilometers per hour. The guy we had on 45 minutes ago, his moped, his maximum speed 32 kilometers per hour. Now, this is because I'm not an avid cyclist on bike paths, so I'd love your insight here. What is the, real world, what's the difference between a moped that can do 32 kilometers per hour on a bike path versus an e-bike that can do 32 kilometers on a bike path?
Well, the difference is one of weight to start with, because these devices are a lot heavier. So in case of a crash, we do all understand the laws of physics that it's going to hurt a lot more. Plus, they often can carry a second passenger, which adds some more weight on it. There's also the fact, and I must admit, that some e-bikes have a throttle, and so that kind of applies to e-bikes as well. But if you're just using a throttle, the chances that you're actually going to reach these 32 kilometers is a lot greater than if you have to pedal and you're only getting an assistance to your pedaling. We had surveys to our community, and the same has been found in a UBC study, research, is that people don't feel comfortable at all sharing bike paths with these devices. It can be super heavy, and it makes a difference. And when we're talking about security, the sense of security really is important, because that might make all the difference between somebody choosing to ride their bike and somebody giving up because they don't feel safe on the bike network. And we want our bike network to stay safe for those vulnerable road users.
What's your advice now to someone who rides Bixie? They show up to the station, they don't have a helmet, it's only the electric bikes that are available. What's your advice today? Risk the ticket, or, walk?
I will never tell people not to respect the law. And, that's why we're trying to change the law and not targeting the police or not telling people to ignore the law. The law is what it is, and it needs to be complied with. But we're hoping that the government is going to realize that this is another mode of transportation that is helping us in our urban mobility challenges and environmental challenges, and that it's not realistic and pragmatic to require a helmet at all times on these bikes.
Magali, it's always a pleasure talking about the various subjects that happen on our bike paths and roads involving cyclists. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for the invitation.
That's Magali Bebronne from Vélo Quebec.